Hello there, everyone. Welcome to the class, both to new and long-time students and lovers of history. This is History with Sire here today to discuss with you the final part of our Western Front topic, which is the donkey thesis. And this video is going to look specifically at the leader, Douglas Haig. This is a gentleman who has been with us throughout pretty much the entirety of the series. That's something we really should consider as we go forward. If you've not already, do check out the first video on the donkey's thesis. We looked at British leadership as a whole and generally across the Western Front. It's always important to remember these are lessons catered towards the student level, so our content and key knowledge will be focused around practicing our historical skills, which will be especially relevant today, just like our last video, because this one is now really bringing all our knowledge together to make an assessment of Douglas Haig and make a decision. Was he a donkey? Was he a hero, in fact? Or maybe he was just a man doing what he could and was just the same as the other soldiers who he served with and above. So, notepads and pens at the ready, and let us begin. So I first want to open with an acknowledgement of the chronology of Haig's historiography. A bit of background for those of you who may have done historiography for the first time, or this is a new phrase, especially those of you who may be doing things like coursework at A level or maybe essays at university. Historiography is essentially the history of history. It's how when we go back through a question or topic that's been encountered before in the past, how has historians' vision and assessment and judgment of it changed over time? And so we've got a quick chronology here of how people's views of Haig has changed over time as well. I do want to stress very much from the open, this is not an exhaustive list of all the Haig biographies out there. This is simply just the most pertinent that I know about and the ones that I have used when crafting this series for you. Also, well, but of course, there are some very big notable ones on here. I'll quickly give you a rundown of what they are. The first one, of course, is Duff Cooper. This is, in effect, the original biography of Haig. In the initial first two volumes, he was a big friend of the family and did, of course, the first initial biography for the Haig family. We then get on to the next major one, which was the educated soldier, John Terraine. He was a big fan of Duff Cooper's biography and really took a lot of the positives that Duff Cooper talked about to heart and gave a very strong appraisal to the gentleman that was Haig. Then a more general one came from Alan Clark. This is the one most famous for our debate because he's the one who really challenged this idea that the generals were heroes and really put to the fore that actually they were idiots, they were fools, and they condemned the men to their deaths. Then we have John Laffin. The title, I think, says it all: Butchers and Bunglers, what his perspective would be. And we have a reappraisal with Gary Sheffield, with Douglas Haig and the Chief, much more in line with the likes of John Terraine, but trying to find a more balanced approach to accept the faults that happen across the timeline. And then wrapping it up are Gary Mead and Gordon Corrigan. For my money, if I had to put any on it of the ones that I've read, Gary Mead's is the most balanced of them all. He tries to really paint the picture of Haig as a general of his time, what he was as a Victorian trained leader, trying to lead this first truly modern war they found themselves in. But all of them are very valid for the historiography, and for all intents and purposes, if you're studying these, you're trying to get that for and against argument of Haig in a lot of detail, especially maybe for the university level. These are, for my money, the biographies that you should be checking out. Of course, as always, do take them with a pinch of salt. Again, don't just flatly believe the first one you read. For instance, if you read Alan Clark's first, you would think the generals were complete failures and they should be rightfully decried as donkeys. But likewise, if you read John Terraine or Duff Cooper's first, you may buy into the drama and the epicness that Haig was indeed a brilliant leader and should be called a hero. So it's good to read a mixture of them, and of course, do bear that in mind as you go through. Whatever you're reading, someone has a vision, someone has a school of thought they're buying into, judging from when they're writing, why they're writing. So bear that in mind if you choose to give any of them a read. So that's our chronology. What we're going to do in the rest of this video is we're going to really use the knowledge that we've gathered throughout our series on our various videos from the whole of the Western Front, especially the Somme, Passchendaele, and 100 Days Offensive and Amiens in 1918. So we're going to bring it together, and so I'll map it all with the general context we've gathered from that. But as always, it's up to you to go away and learn more, read more. I will put these in the description as well with a few other works that deal with the entirety of the Western Front, if, as always, you want to take your knowledge further. So, we'll start with the first half of the debate, which is the view that Douglas Haig was actually a hero. This is the one that came out pretty much after the war was won. Many leaders saw that he was the man who won the war, and it's important to remember initially in those years afterwards, the veterans really were praising and quite supportive of Haig. Many of them were open. It's worth remembering how many came to his funeral. Thousands turned out for his funeral. and saw him really as the man who won the war. We also have some clear evidence that he showed some success with this. We of course saw in 1918 especially, he worked well with other leaders, especially Arthur Currie and Monash and Pershing. And it's also worth mentioning the other leaders as well who he put trust in as well. We have to remember that Haig did choose some very strong leaders, perhaps like Sir Rawlinson and Plumer. We could highlight as two especially strong ones that we had. Yeah, there was a bit of a misstep with Gough. Maybe he was a blind spot, especially as we saw with Passchendaele. All the same, he had some good picks along the way. There are other ones that you may have picked up in wider reading. Horn, maybe. You may have heard of him and his successes that happened on various fronts. So it's worth remembering them. And also some of the I say failures. Also some of the missteps, maybe perhaps Allenby. Maybe you found out about him. Maybe doubt his appointment. Why did he pick him? So again, got a bit of a balanced approach there. All in all, maybe you could say his leaders who he worked with, who he trusted, quite good. He also oversaw the evolution of the British Army. Again, it was Kitchener who started the Power Battalions, but it's Haig, after Kitchener's death, who oversees their growth, their evolution. We saw how they became better at tactics, became really good at combat, really became a well-oiled machine that pulled off that victory in 1918. And along the way, they had these various tactics. Creeping barrage was really successful. Combined arms offensive really won the war in the end. Tanks became a fearsome force in the Hundred Days Offensive. And so perhaps it's right to say, as some historians do, that there was a learning curve across the war, that the generals did learn on the job, and Haig especially did do well to adapt. We could certainly say that Haig performed better than his previous leader, John French, and Haig did oversee that grand victory in 1918. However, there is, of course, the counter argument, the other way we can view things. Again, this is where the donkey thesis comes in. And a phrase we mentioned a couple of times throughout the series was the idea of a chateau general, someone who stays behind the lines and doesn't really get too involved. Again, we saw massive disconnect with that style of leadership, how we have soldiers on the ground like Plumer wanting to do his own style and have a bit of freedom and flexibility. We saw that the Somme as well, but Haig and the leaders were very much inflexible about that, always insisting on this breakthrough, very fixated on it, and not really removing much from it. He had various spats with the leaders, John French, as we say, but he didn't really get along with the French. He hated being a bit of a subordinate to them and wanted a bit more flexibility there, especially towards the later years of the war, especially as demotations. We can't get away from this reality. Yes, the attritional style of war did work, but millions of casualties were sustained throughout it. Some historians will counter this and say that this is an unfair appraisal, that at the end of the day, to win the war, casualties were a necessity and they had to be done. But as we discussed, these really acceptable losses, could Haig have found a different solution to reduce these losses or even avoid them altogether? Especially because by 1918, these coordinated and repetitive blows were becoming a big success. We also had the idea that maybe they were slow to take up the ideas of combined arms. Yes, they realized that creeping barrage and combining artillery and infantry together was going to be central to winning the offensive because it was going to break that trench deadlock. But that time, that pace to get the army to that position to win, it was so long. And this is where we get into a bit of a discussion. Is this Haig's fault that the realities of war were that it took so long to prepare the men? Or could he have done something? Could he have tried to have more trust? Could he have maybe changed some offensive? Did he make the right decisions? It's so difficult to say. And of course, there are some big black spots to his leadership regardless. Yes, there was the reality that he was positioned to fight at the Somme against his true judgment, but we do have that mass defeat there on July 1st, 1916. Could Haig have pushed more? Could they have avoided this offensive? Could they have managed to think of something different? Was Haig right to trust Rawlinson with these ideas and plannings on the day? Again, the PALS battalions, they were untrained, unarmed, and without equipment in these early years of the war. And yes, it was a complex setup. Roughly 60 infantry divisions in the end were the ones who took part. But this is the reality of war. And learning maybe is a time-consuming thing that the forces of Britain really struggled to grasp. So what really is the most convincing position to take here? Which one can we substantiate the most? And this is where it's really down to you as the historian now to make that decision for yourself. I've given some suggestions both for the first view that he was a hero, is he the man who won the war? Maybe he was a donkey, this fool who sent the boys of Britain to their death to die in their thousands. But maybe there's a middle ground. Maybe we accept that these views have some merit to both of them and try and find this ground in the middle to say, actually, maybe this was a man doing the best he could in an impossible situation. Again, he was a Victorian trained general, and he was overseeing a war here that was new in nature, new technology, new tactics, beyond the scale of anything they'd seen before. Again, this kind of war, this World War conflict, had not been seen since the Napoleonic era. The British Army hadn't been in this kind of combative mode since the days of the Peninsular War and Waterloo. Yes, they had other spats, of course, especially in the Boer Wars. They also fought in Crimea against the Russians in the 1850s. But all the same, this was a new style of war, and they weren't really fully prepared for it, and they really had to learn on the job and grasp that learning curve as they went through it. And again, the reality is Haig's not alone in this. As we saw, there are other leaders throughout. We've not studied the other fronts in massive detail. The Germans, we know, really struggled to hold that defensive in this war of attrition. The Russians lost in the war, all being said and done. The Austro-Hungarians really had a difficult time in their conflict. Also, the French. I mean, compared to the French, Haig had a really good run of it. Haig was a leader from 1915 right up to the end of the war, whereas on the French side, they was the man we finished with the French was totally different. They'd gone through 2 to 3 different leaders in the whole conflict, and various generals taking command. Whereas after John French was replaced, Haig was the leader who stayed throughout. And this is the reality of war. The sad truth is that it was truly an expensive journey of trial and error that necessitated enormous sacrifice for the army to learn how to win and how for technology to catch up and actualize this vision, the grand breakthrough that Haig desired. Every man had done his duty by 1918, and Haig had indeed oversaw that evolution, and it was an enormous achievement all the same for them to finally have victory at last in 1918. However, we can't overlook this. The mistakes were costly when they happened, and Haig had a role in it regardless. What is the right decision? There is no right decision. This is what we are as historians. All I ask you to do is to look at the evidence, find it for yourself, be wide, be truthful, be honest, really question yourself. Is this the evidence that we can trust? Is it the evidence that we can follow? Make a decision for it of your own merit and figure out for yourself which view is the most convincing. Was Douglas Haig a hero? Was he a fool? Was he just a man doing the best he could? That's for you to decide. And so we close this series now. This is the final one we've had for the term, and this is where we will be ending our World War One content. There may, of course, be other videos down the line. I'll have a see if anyone requests any specific content, any other things that are relevant. I know for a fact we haven't done really any of the naval wars, much of the aircraft, but I also know these areas of the war are not as well studied, certainly for the GCSE and A-level curriculums. But if you would like any content on it, do let me know in the comments. And of course, let me know your decisions as well. Were these generals, were they heroes or donkeys? Which leader, all of them together, not just Haig here, do you think deserves the most praise? Which one should we remember in history as the one who maybe definitely wasn't a donkey and really fit the vision of a general who went above and beyond and achieved great victory? Likewise, which one should we criticize the most? Which ones made those clear mistakes in your mind? Again, do bring in some wider reading if you have any. It's always great to share that extra knowledge and show that you've gone above and beyond the curriculum and demonstrated what you can do. And of course, which battle was a turning point in the success for the British? Was it that learning curve at the Somme? Was it the attritional success despite the cost of Passchendaele? Was it a smaller scale battle? Was it like the Battle of Hamel? Was it even way back with the Battle of Mons that ensured the British survival and the war did not end swiftly in 1914? Or maybe it's at the very end with Amiens and beyond, where they actually achieved great victory and won all the same. Do let me know in the comments. If you do want some further reading, if you are studying Haig and the generals further, I am leaving those in the description box below with a few others for the Western Front at large, so do check those out if you wish. But of course, here we are. Thank you, class, for all your hard work. I hope it's been insightful. I hope this has proved useful. And I hope you'll join me for our next topic in the following term. If you would like more content, if you would like to experience the next termly topic we take part in, do make sure to subscribe. Do make sure to like these videos. Again, engagement in this history is always appreciated. This is History with Sire. Thank you for listening.